It's rivalry week for Seton Hall, Villanova at home, and then a road game that was moved from Carnesecca Arena to Madison Square Garden. That'll be on Saturday. And of course, they're coming off the high of beating UConn. Came back down to earth with a humbling loss to Marquette in Milwaukee, and then on Sunday, seemed like we've seen this game God knows how many times where they get down big at the half and then make this comeback that just comes up short as they were down 19 at the half. Come back, but fall short by 7. We're going to break that all down here on this edition of Hoist the Colors with our special guest. We had him on last year to talk about the NIT quarterfinals, but we're bringing him back. He's got his concentration with St. John's, but he really is a beacon of knowledge when it comes to college basketball in the Northeast. It is none other than our friend from Daly Dose of Hoops, Jaden Daly. Jaden, thanks for joining Pat and I for this week's episode.
Tim, my man, always a pleasure to come on with you too. It's always refreshing when I can talk about some other teams in the area and not have to go all the way up to Connecticut to do it. No disrespect to the Huskies. Always a pleasure to come on. Thank you for having me.
Well, I mean, let's just peel the Band-Aid off. I feel like if you take a shot every time you hear me say that throughout all of season 2, just peel the Band-Aid off and talk about the Marquette game. Trading shots back and forth in the early goings, and then Cam Jones just took over. Marquette was hitting 3 after 3 after 3. Seton Hall's offense just stalls out, and Marquette, they just ball out and manhandle the Pirates, as quite frankly was expected by a lot of people. I mean, Pat, was any of the Pirates' performance surprising to you in Milwaukee?
Not particularly. I mean, it's interesting. There's 2 points. One, that when you read Jerry Carino's recap of the game for the Asbury Park Press, he commented that he did not think that the shot selection was bad. It's just that Seton Hall didn't hit their shots. And then, of course, the irony of Marquette blowing us out twice in the last month, which were really their only 2 good games basically since the middle of January. Jaden was out in Milwaukee, actually, when they played Connecticut, when they sort of laid an egg on the big Saturday Night Fox game against UConn. And then they've had their struggle since, bad loss against Villanova after they beat us last week. They blew an opportunity to beat St. John's at the Garden and they lost to Marquette at home. So it's sort of inexplainable. I guess Marquette's probably, I mean, look, we could say there's about 5 or 6 other teams in the Big East, but in particular, Marquette's a bad matchup because, they look for turnovers. They can be a great perimeter shooting team most of the time, although they've had their struggles lately. So it's just a matter of this year in particular, we just don't match up well against Marquette, which is why we've taken, 2 beatings. The first beating at the Rock should have been by more than 17 points, and we got some garbage time points late in that game. This one in Marquette was probably more truer to the difference between the 2 teams. So that's just the way it goes. Gus Yalden, by the way, had one of his better games playing in his home state of Wisconsin with 6 points. But that also speaks to something that we can follow up on looking at the Xavier game about some of the inconsistencies that Seton Hall has at the center position, which has been a problem all season.
Jade, what were your overall takeaways from, looking at the box score? And I just noticed with just looking at the box score now, Okorafor didn't play for Seton Hall on Tuesday night in defeat. Yalden was, for him to put up 6 points in 13 minutes, really solid night for him. But they only turned the ball over 10 times, which was, a stark contrast for how the first matchup went in Newark. But Jaden, you saw Marquette choke against UConn on National Marquette Day, but they obviously came to play against the Pirates.
Yeah, and 3 days after going to Milwaukee, I saw them get into foul trouble at the Garden against St. John's and blow that game too. So not exactly a good stretch for Shaka or the Golden Eagles, but from what I was able to pick up off the Seton Hall game, and I didn't watch any of it. Maybe I may have done myself a favor by doing so, but
It's probably past your bedtime. It was like 9 Eastern. It was a late one.
it was definitely a late game. So yeah, I was engrossed in UConn Villanova anyway. So Marquette did what it was supposed to do, and I was worried about Seton Hall because it was a short turnaround after the UConn win that I was at the Rock for this last Saturday, a week and change ago, where Shah's got to come back off a 48-hour turnaround, go halfway across the country. Dylan Adewusu is just coming back. Scotty Middleton's just coming back. Chauncey Jenkins still hasn't come back yet. So it's been the same shorthanded rotation. You don't know how it's going to respond against Marquette and that defense and the way Shaka pressures you. It went the way I thought it would. Let's just leave it at that.
Honestly, I mean, I think it's good to like just drill the fork down and like, all right, this is where we're gonna end it. I mean, I don't blame you one bit. So looking at Sunday, once again, I mean, how I feel like there you could probably say this sounds like the same script from at least four different games. Georgetown was similar. Oklahoma State was similar. And that's just two right off the bat that I can think of. There's probably a couple more. But you're down 19 at the half against a Xavier team that desperately needs a win to keep their tournament hopes alive. And the Pirates, they put that press on. Feels like too little too late, and they claw their way back. But in the end, like I said, too little too late. Isaiah Coleman puts up 24, but it's obviously not enough as Xavier spoils Seton Hall versus Cancer Day at the Rock with a 7-point victory. Pat, you were in the building. Tell me about what it was like. I know you had your pink on for the event, and just break it down for me as best you can. What happened, what went wrong, and I mean how the Pirates were able to once again make a game out of something that just seemed like it was over at halftime.
Well, there's a couple of things, takeaways, sort of the two things that you have to use as your base here. One is Ryan Conwell was in his bag. He's one of the best transfers in the Big East. We knew what type of shooter he was based on his play at Indiana State, particularly last season, and that has translated over, and that came to the forefront Sunday afternoon. They get off to the good start. They took, I think it was a 13-9 lead about 7 or 8 minutes into the game, and part of that was because no one on Xavier could really get any momentum going. One of my thoughts about Zach Fremantle, by the way, was that all Fremantle wanted to do Sunday afternoon was hit a couple of threes to show off in front of his hometown fans because this was his last game playing in New Jersey. I think this was like his fourth or fifth game playing in New Jersey. He's been there forever. So I think all he wanted to do was hit a couple of threes to show off, and Miller seemed to be okay. Sean Miller, the Xavier coach, seemed to be okay with that because I think he was thinking most of the way through this game, we're going to take a nice lead in this game and probably just cruise to victory. Now, unfortunately for Xavier, that didn't really pan out because, again, they really couldn't get anything from anyone else, whether it be Dalen Swain. I was disappointed because Swain has played really well, and there are people mumbling about Swain becoming an NBA prospect. But Dalen Swain did not have his best game Sunday afternoon. They didn't get much from Dalen. They didn't get anything from McKnight. They didn't get much from. They got a couple of threes from Jerome Hunter, of all people. But they really didn't get consistent scoring from anybody other than Conwell. And then you get to maybe the key play of the game with about 45 seconds to go. Xavier has the ball up 3, and Conwell hits one from 26 feet, and that basically was the nail in the coffin to whatever momentum Seton Hall was getting, making the comeback. one other thought here was that as good a game as that looked for Coleman, he took a stretch from like the 10-minute mark up until about 4 or 5 minutes in the second half where he did practically nothing. So that he scored 8 points in the first 10 minutes of the game. And then I think he scored maybe 12 or 14 points in the last 7 or 8 minutes of the game. But that empty stretch was when Xavier went from down 13-9 and went on a 31-8 run to get that big halftime lead you referenced to. So in that sense, that's just unfortunately Seton Hall has done that way too often when their offense just can't do anything and their defense can't find a way to stop open shooters. And Conwell kept beating them and beating them and beating them until the comeback at the end. They had chances. They might have been a player or two away, but again, we've seen that before. Providence, Georgetown, Oklahoma State, and to a lesser extent, the game out of Butler back in the middle of January. So too little, too late, a player or two away. But, unfortunately, this team just has the look of a team that's always going to be a player or two away in games like that.
So a couple of things. I know we have clowned this team God knows how many times for their really bad free throw shooting. They were 16 of 18 in this game, which like that, in this case, the free throws actually kept them in the game kind of. Also helps they forced 18 Xavier turnovers. But the thing is, they plagued themselves. They committed 25 fouls. I know that, looking at the officiating crew, I know Frank in general from the St. John side, his mortal enemy, Pat Driscoll, was on this game along with Paul Zelk. I didn't get to see the game. I was working a match for Utica City FC that day, so I really didn't get to watch it.
Actually, Tim Sells didn't make the game because of what happened in the Duke Illinois game. Jeff Clark was on the whistle instead.
So the ESPN app is a liar to me. Worldwide leader in sports, my ass. But yeah, all joking aside, I mean, honestly, Jeff Clark is probably a minor upgrade. I like his work. I mean,
I like Clark.
But beside the point. I mean, you can't commit 25 fouls, give Xavier as many chances as they had at the free throw line, and expect to win, especially when you let Conwell just go absolutely berserk. And on less than 10 shots, he ended up scoring 23 points. But yeah, I mean, just I know that you were in the Garden on Sunday, but you obviously must have been following along through your channels and who you know on the beat of Seton Hall basketball. But I almost feel like Groundhog's Day whenever you see this kind of scripting where they're down at the half and then they make this comeback and fall short.
Mm-hmm. Me and Jason covered the Oklahoma State game before Christmas, and it sounded like a replica of the Oklahoma State game where they went down big at halftime and then the press got them back in the game. Like, where have we seen this before? But I'll tell you this, Tim, for a stretch, following that game was probably better than what I saw in front of me because I was hoping UConn would put a better effort together, and it turned into the one thing I didn't want to see, a blowout on either end. No disrespect to St. John's, but a game like that you never want to see turn into a runaway, and that's what it was. Credit Seton Hall for getting back in it. God's Will has really impressed me over the last month, and I don't know how much you guys have spoken about him in prior episodes or will in this one, but the UConn game confirmed it, and then a couple other games in between that have also shown me that Shot's getting something out of this kid, and he might be, out of all the newcomers, the freshmen and the transfers, he might be the biggest revelation on this roster aside from Coleman's emergence as the guy.
I will say this about Aaron Aronay, and this goes back to something I said about the Marquette game a little bit, is Aaron Aronay is a little bit frustrating in the sense that you see him put up a game like he did against Connecticut, and he had to do it against Samson Johnson, who a lot of people think is one of the more talented centers in the Big East.
My
But then
problem with Sampson, Pat, is he gets into foul trouble too much and he can't
all the
use his
time,
athleticism.
all the
Yeah.
time. He didn't get in foul trouble though at the Rock, if you remember.
No, he didn't.
So really, Aaron Aronet's great game against Johnson was Johnson basically the only time they had to bring him out. I think he got 4 fouls, and they had to bring Terrace Reed in. And the minutes Reed played in that game are pretty good as an aside. But Aaron Aronet was a non-factor yesterday when he's playing against guys he should no disrespect to Zach Fremantle. Fremantle's not one of your tougher interior forces in the Big East. So they should have found a way to get Aaron Aronay more attempts at the basket. Maybe it's a credit to Miller that he basically decided to pack the paint and dare Seton Hall to shoot over the top, knowing that Seton Hall doesn't have the best shooters in the world. I mean, after you get past Coleman and to a lesser extent Dylan Adewusu, there's not a lot of shooting on this team, particularly since Scotty Middleton apparently Middleton's not 100% right now, which is why Middleton didn't get a lot of minutes yesterday. So, when you don't have Middleton, Jenkins, and you have Dylan Adewusu not at 100%, you can see, Isaiah Coleman hits a few shots and then you do a better job closing out, which is what they did after the first 10 minutes. And then they couldn't get the ball to Aaron Aronay so that he could maybe take advantage of the matchups he had against Fremantle and to a lesser extent John Ugley. So it's a freshman. He's going to have his ups. He's going to have his downs. I would be shocked if he didn't have a good game, a couple more good games down the road to give Holloway something to think about when he's putting together his roster next season.
So, speaking of God's will, looking ahead to this week, starting with Villanova, but in a broader context, Ari Aronay was still really green because Villanova was the conference opener, which was 2 months ago. And then St. John's at home was last month. And both of those times, he looked like a freshman. Since then, he's played a lot better, as everybody knows. But starting with Villanova, another undersized team, Eric Dixon's one of the best players in the Big East. That's a consensus. Everybody knows that. But he's 6'8", and he's not really known as a great rebounder. That gives a bit of an advantage to Ari Aronay, but in the broader context of the matchup, Villanova was able to pull away in the second half, and Seton Hall made it a respectable game, but Villanova had them at arm's length pretty much the entire second half. Jaden, I'll start with you because you just saw Villanova on Friday smothering and crushing Marquette in a stunner at the Finn. What do you make of this rematch going down at the Rock?
I don't know what to make of it, to be quite honest with you, Tim. I think this could be an opportunity if Seton Hall can hold it together to maybe spring an upset. Villanova, aside from that Marquette win, has not been playing its best basketball since the win at the Hartford Civic Center, where Alex Caravan missed the 2 free throws at the end of regulation that should have given UConn at least an overtime game that UConn probably would have won had it got there. You look at what Villanova's done since then, getting boat raced by Providence not too long after that. And I see a very inconsistent team. I don't really like the backcourt between Brickus and Jordan Longino. I think Seton Hall has opportunities there if Dylan can handle the ball and Coleman and Duval continue to beat Coleman and Duval. We didn't talk about how Garway has progressed over the last several weeks, and I think that's something that should be heralded here against a guard-oriented team like Villanova that always plays 3 or 4 out. Poplar and Dixon are going to be tough customers inside, but I think there is an opportunity there for Seton Hall. I really do.
Yeah, Villanova's been totally, Kyle Neptune's going to Kyle Neptune. They're going to have games that they have no business losing, that they lose, and they're going to find a way to win a game or two. They have no business. This season's a Exhibit C of because they beat St. John's a week and a half ago. Only two teams in the Big East have done that. And if you told me Villanova was going to do that, I'd be shocked, given how inconsistent. And I think that was 2 weeks after they choked a game on Martin Luther King Day against Georgetown in the same building. And then they had you want to call it bad luck, when Stephen Ashworth of Creighton banked in the three-pointer at the Wells Fargo the first week of February.
From the corner,
Sometimes,
no less.
right. Sometimes you make your own luck, and you make bad luck if you're Kyle Neptune coach team that can't put people away. And there are parallels to last season. I mean, not that Villanova. I don't. Villanova is a little bit off the bracketology right now. I think they're not. They're not in a lot of people's even next four out. They're probably about 12 or 15 teams off the bracketology. But they came into the game at the Prudential Center last March with a golden opportunity of a couple of wins in the last week to cement an NCAA bid, and they play one of their worst games of the season against a Seton Hall team that was also fighting for their NCAA lives, for what it's worth. And the thing we've seen with Seton Hall is that even though they have been undermanned, even though they haven't won a lot of games, they've contended in games. It's different than what you saw, let's say, from the Paul and Georgetown teams of the recent past, where when you get to this point of the season, all they wanted to do was play out the string. Not a lot of playing out the string at Seton Hall. I give credit a lot, and Jaden mentioned this, Dylan Adewusu, because that's a guy who right now, is playing for his pride. And that's why, and we mentioned this last week, Tim, that's why he's here. Because we know that guy walks on the court and all he wants to do is win. He'll do whatever it takes to help his team win a ball game. Hopefully hopefully he's pretty close to healthy, because I'm looking forward not only to what he does Wednesday night, but also to the game Saturday, and then probably his last appearance at Madison Square Garden when Seton Hall's in the Big East tournament in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so a couple things I want to add. Villanova, I know Pat mentioned that they are still they're on the radar, but they're not really on the radar when it comes to bracketology in terms of being way far back. You mentioned the bad losses. St. Joe's and Columbia come to mind immediately in the non-con. They lost to Virginia. They had an opportunity to beat Maryland and squandered that at the Rock. They beat Cincinnati, but that win is aged like milk, unfortunately for them. They had the loss to Georgetown at home, but they have these nonsensical wins based on the ugly losses that they've had. It's a bit of an anomaly, but here they are with a golden opportunity to win out to end the regular season and go to the Big East tournament. If they can get a first round bye, that puts them in great shape, because look at the schedule they have ahead of them. At Seton Hall, obviously Wednesday night, and then you close out at home against Butler, and then you go to Georgetown, who I know they beat them at the Finn on MLK Day, but more likely than not, that game's going to be a quad one game for Nova. And if they win that game and win the other two, they will be in better shape to sneak into the tournament. And again, Villanova fans have been clamoring for that because Kyle Neptune, it just hasn't been – he's just come short each of the last 2 years, and it's looking like he's going to come short again. But you're not down but not out yet. Still got a little more ball to play. But I think this is another game. Seton Hall's got nothing to lose. Villanova's got everything to lose here if they lose this game. I mean, what's your assessment? Either one of you.
I want to add one more thought though about, and I got this good insight from my guy Pat Zeng on when he did his episode of State of the Nova Nation last week. A lot of Villanova people think that Eric Dixon's main focus right now is to catch the great Kerry Kittles for the all-time Villanova scoring list. I think he's a little more than 100 points away and they have about 4 or 5 games left. So I think he's got to average like 23, 24 points. So a lot of people at Villanova are thinking that Dixon is as interested, if not more interested, in how many points he puts up. Now, granted, he puts up 30 piece against Seton Hall. Villanova's probably winning the game as a consequence to that. But a lot of people at Villanova have been talking about the fact that Dixon has taken bad shots over the past month because he's more interested in getting the scoring record there than he is about helping Villanova win basketball games. So that's something to keep in mind. If he takes too many bad shots on Wednesday night, shots that, a lot of people have said he's basically decided that he's going to stand 25 feet out the whole game and just jack up 3-pointers instead of, let's say, either looking to pass the ball or looking to play pick and roll with Brickus and or Poplar. So that's something to keep in mind, is that if Dixon gets shot happy, sort of the way Fremantle got a little bit shot happy at the Rock on Sunday, that could put Villanova that could cause Villanova's offense to stagnate a little bit because that's just because Dixon's basically on his own agenda as opposed to playing for what the team wants.
Jaden, yeah, your take on my take of Villanova lose this game, like kiss the tournament hopes goodbye. You're done.
Yeah, and I think the only way they get into the tournament right now, I think, is if Villanova wins the Big East, because you're looking at they win out. Okay, they're either the 5 or the 6 seed, which means you'll get either Marquette or UConn one way or the other in the quarterfinals if you don't blow it to DePaul or Seton Hall like you almost did a year ago. So Neptune has that working against him. Seton Hall has nothing to lose. Like you said, Tim, I think the playing with house money factor benefits this team. One more home game after that against Creighton, but this is one where I think Shaw's going to have this group a little more fired up coming off the Xavier game Sunday. Another short turnaround, but this is a winnable game, a gettable game, and I think Seton Hall has more to gain from it than Villanova does right now.
And listen, like Seton Hall beat this team at the Rock, and that's something that has, up until last year, that's just something they weren't able to do since what?
Delgado, the Whitehead Delgado years.
Yeah, which was their freshman year. Like they hadn't actually no. I just remembered the Miles Powell from Trenton game
2019.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like that had been like haunting them for years, and finally they got over the hump. But given how inconsistent Villanova's been, we know they can pull it off, an upset of Nova, but do they is the question. Either one you could chime in.
I don't know if it actually happens. I think it can. I'm just not sure if it will. It's going to come down to how much Seton Hall can hold on to the ball, how much they can contain Dixon, and what you're going to get from the guards, what you're going to get from Dylan. If the shots aren't falling, it's going to be a long night. How much you're going to be able to get from Middleton physically. If he can go, then you're going to need him. You're going to need a lead bay. You're going to need God's will, the two of them, to step up at the 4 and the 5 spots, especially against Dixon and Poplar, who might be able to go off a little more in the paint because of a similar matchup height-wise.
I'll leave it at that. I don't want to predict how Villanova is going to play. I'm going to leave it that Villanova's been so unpredictable. For anybody to try to predict how a game Villanova plays a game against anybody is a fool's errand right now. So I'll leave it as I think the analysis we've given about what Villanova could be and what Seton Hall could be on Wednesday night. We'll just leave it at that.
To quote Sacketology regarding Kyle Neptune, bro is plotting something devious. I shout out Sacketology. You're the meme god from Nova, just in big Twitter in general. I mean, he just has the same playbook, but it's so good. He can just rehash it. It's so funny every time. Anyways, Saturday, Madison Square Garden. They moved it from Carnesecca, but they maintained the same time slot. It's on CBS at 2:15 in the afternoon. By the way, it follows another Big East game. UConn Providence is at noon, so little Big East double shot on CBS. And this has big implications for St. John's. That is obviously with a win against the Pirates, and it's only fitting that they could do this on their home court. They could clinch the Big East regular season title outright for the first time in ages. Jaden, I don't know if you know the figure offhand. I think it's been outright since the 80s, right?
Outright since the 85 Final Four years. So it has not happened in my lifetime. I was born in 86.
Yeah. So
I saw that St. John's team.
not a first I was thinking would happen this season, but that's why they don't play the games on paper.
Amen to that. Obviously, if you're a Seton Hall fan, you just want the game to go better than the one in Newark, more than anything. But Pat, I know you brought this up earlier. Dylan Adewusa didn't play in that game at the Rock. He'll be playing in this game at the Garden on Saturday, and he hasn't. Well, he did play St. John's in the Garden at the Big East tournament, but as a true visitor, he played at Carnesecca. It was at UBS last year, which, by the way, that's a crime. I think that's just atrocious. That unfortunately that happened. But what do you make of Adewusu being back against St. John's in the Garden this time around? And I mean, what do you think his presence is going to lead for this Seton Hall team and making sure that they don't have a repeat of that massacre in Newark?
Well, I think I had said this when we previewed the first St. John's game, which was, Wusu's got sort of two chips in his shoulder. One is, of course, the fact that he's not with St. John's, that he was one of the players who Rick Pitino chose not to keep around. Basically said, I'm keeping Joel Soriano and I'm throwing everyone else. Basically, everyone else on this team has to prove they want to be here. And it turned out that I think that Soriano was the only major player from the Mike Anderson era to hang around with the team.
Yeah, he kept Dritz and Traore.
Right.
That is a very odd. I mean,
let's do a shout out to the Iona people and mention the great Sabine Ayo. Big game against DePaul, by the way. That really ticked off one of Jaden's Iona buddies, Guy Filatico. That Sabine Ayo had a big game last week for St. John's. Another Pitino favorite. But now that we've gone a tangent a little bit, 2 points about Wusu. One is that St. John's didn't want him when they did the coaching change from Anderson to Pitino. And the second thing is, what is his reaction going to be being across the court from Kadari Richmond? A guy who he bled, sweat, and tears going all through last season. That NIT run, the great Big East play, the fact that they were snubbed from the NCAA tournament, sort of this band of brothers thing going on. And obviously Wusu won't get an opportunity to play against Dre Davis of Ole Miss, but he does get a chance to face one of his old teammates from last season. And, as much as the fans have complained about Richmond leaving Seton Hall for St. John's, what's Dylan Adewusu's reaction going to be when he gets to be, face to face with him on the court? One thing which is interesting is that Wusu's one of the better when he's healthy. And if he's close to 100% for this game, he's one of the better defenders in the Big. He's one of the best defensive players in the Big East. He can get some steals. He's good at disrupting the passing lanes. He's good at getting in the way of a driving player. That's one thing which Richmond has killed a lot of teams lately with his ability to get in the lane and get off that 10-foot jump shot. And he's been almost automatic in St. John's great stretch lately. So if you take that away from St. John's, because you put an elite defender, an above average defender like Wusu on top of him, you know, can St. John's get what they can St. John's get from like the Aaron Scotts or the R.J. Lewis's or the Zuby Ejiofor's? They probably can because we saw what they did to Seton Hall at the Rock a month ago. But Wusu's a variable that was not in the equation. But the other thing, to be perfectly frank, is that St. John's is going to want this game, not only because it's on national television, not only because it's going to be the last time they play in front of a home crowd at the Garden, as opposed to the Big East tournament, which will probably be more of a 50-50 crowd. My sense, and Jaden can vouch for this, seeing the reaction of other Big East fan bases, is that the Big East tournament could turn into St. John's against the world when we get to the Garden in 2 weeks. Because we know the Connecticut fans are pissed off as heck against St. John's. Uh, I don't know how well the Midwestern fan bases are going to travel for the Big
Creighton
East.
will.
You think there'll be a bunch of Creighton fans? Well, the point is everyone else in the building besides all of the St. John's fans will probably be rooting against St. John's at the Garden. They could draw Providence in the quarterfinals. I would expect Butler would beat Providence in an 8-9 game. But if they play a Providence, the Providence fans are gonna the Providence fans are gonna be all over St. John's in the quarterfinal. Then you get to a potential semifinal matchup, a 3-match with Connecticut. And I think the other fans in the building decide to say it's going to be that would end up being like 90% St. John's and UConn fans, but the rest of them, it's not like, let's say yesterday, which was I think that was a majority St. John's crowd for the first time in a while at the Garden when they're playing Connecticut. The Big East tournament is going to be different because all the tickets are given out. So it's a question of how many tickets can St. John's fans get on the resale market to get into the Garden for the semifinals and the finals for the Big East tournament. So Saturday's going to be the last. Saturday's going to be the grand finale for this group in front of a home crowd at the Garden, and they're going to want to go out the Garden with a bang. I one as an aside, it's funny that Jim Dolan of all people uh, gets a lot of credit for allowing St. John's to play this game and to move the game from Carnesecca. And I never expected to see New York basketball fans give Jim Dolan so much love, but here we are in 2025.
Rare Jim Dolan W. Very rare. But yeah, and yeah, you're right. I mean, when I saw they moved it to the Garden, well, I'm like, well, the demand I knew was going to be a factor. Like, yeah, there every St. John's fan, given how great they've been in the chant and what's at stake now. Of course, there's going to be an insane amount of demand, and not too much demand to have the kind of crowd that they would get at Carnesecca. So James Dolan, I'll give you a tip of the cap, even though you have irked me many a time as a Knick fan. You actually did the right thing here. So,
Well, he's irking me
good
twice
job,
because
sir.
he's pissing Seton Hall. He's dumping on Seton Hall by letting 7 or 8 thousand more St. John's fans in this game. But that's beside the point.
Then I retract that. James Dolan, you're cut off. Anywho, I mean, St. John's like they're ready to party like it's 1985 again. Or no, that's that. No, I know they got a lot of unfinished business, but where it's a mashup of Prince and Bowling for Soup. But that's a digression and a pop culture reference. If you don't get that, I'll be a little disappointed in you if you're watching at home. But if on the St. John side of things, I mean, they cruised to an easy win. You think Pitino's just gonna? I guarantee Pitino in the locker room is going to be treating them like they only beat Seton Hall by 1 in Newark the last time they played them.
Yeah, and the game is a whiteout, so he's going to wear the Colonel Sanders suit.
Oh, God damn it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You think he's got that? You think he's? I thought he was going to break that out for Creighton, to be honest.
That's what I thought. He did that last year, too, but it'll probably be Saturday. And yeah, St. John's Seton Hall should always be played at the Garden. Bobby Gonzalez had that right 20 years ago or however long ago it was. Actually, it's 17 years to the day that he said that in his press conference after losing to Carnesecca in 2008, that that game should always be played at the Garden, and it should. There was no need for the UBS debacle last year and the press conference that ensued, and then Carnesecca 2 years prior. You always want to showcase your local rivals on a big stage, and I think Ed Cole, the AD at St. John's, deserves his credit for orchestrating and facilitating the move there. They're already at 16, almost 17,000 tickets sold. There may be a sellout depending on sales the day of and the night before. So we'll see what happens there. And yeah, Pitino's going to come out and treat this like the game at the Rock last month was a one possession win. Very few people can motivate like him, love him or hate him. So he'll have St. John's fired up. They know what's at stake. The fans know what's at stake. It'll be up to Seton Hall to climb the mountain.
Well, speaking of climbing the mountain, Pat, I mean, what do you think are the biggest things that they have to improve to avoid a humiliation like what we saw in Newark?
Well, I mean, obviously the first one is don't turn the ball over. And I think the second thing is don't force up the first. See, that's part of the problem that everyone's having against St. John's is that they force you to take bad shots. That's not unique to Seton Hall. We saw that with Connecticut. We saw that with Marquette. We saw that down the stretch against Xavier. So when their defense turns up, I mean, I mentioned this today. It was funny. A guy who's done some good analytics for St. John's. This guy, I think his name is Jason Forden, doing some great analytics on the defensive side, was trying to make the argument for Zuby Ejiofor to be the defensive player of the year. And the point I made was that I can't tell you who I think is their best defensive player because Kadari Richmond's a very good defensive player. Aaron Scott has taken what he learned playing defense under Grant McCaslin at North Texas and translated that into playing. I mean, he had a heck of a ball game, shutting down Dixon over which game was it? What I forgot what game he's had some really good defensive moments as well for St. John's, and then R.J. Lewis has shown some good defense. Devion Scott has played good defense for St. John's, so they have. Saint. It's funny, and it's a comment we've heard it time and time again. It actually headlines one of their podcasts. Pitino saying, when you play for the front of the jersey, the back prospers, and he's gotten tremendous buy-in on this defensive mentality for St. John's. It's no accident that they are, one of the. I think they're top 10 in defensive efficiency as per KenPom.
The second behind Tennessee.
Even better. They've moved up a lot in the last few. I mean, they've played their best basketball this season. It's no accident when you get the buy-in that Pitino has got on the defensive end, which is sort of rare in this era of basketball where a lot of people are just thinking more about how many points they get in the score sheet as opposed to how well I play defense. And they're not even worried about particular defensive statistics. I mean, that's one thing. Love or hate Kadari Richmond. Kadari Richmond was never particularly worried about what he put on the stat sheet. Richmond's first focus, even at Seton Hall, was whether he wins the game or he loses the game. And I think that has come out to the fore these last few weeks. And there have been games when he's had to take St. John's and carry them, particularly on nights when they can't hit the three-point shot. R.J. Lewis has been hurt over the past couple of weeks, so he's had to pick up some of the slack from Lewis. He's had to pick up the slack when Davian Smith missed a bunch of games over the past few weeks. So Richmond's been carrying this team because Richmond sees his eye on the prize. And part of that, he'll probably get that payoff on Saturday afternoon. I would think that, UConn, it's one thing to beat UConn at home. It's another thing to beat St. John's in front of 15 or 16,000 St. John's fans looking for their next. So, in that sense, I think that, that this would be, I guess I can't really, I'll be honest with you, Tim, I hate to say this. I don't really see a path for us winning this game, barring a bunch of St. John's injuries or barring some super atrocious officiating, which turns this into a foul shooting contest. And that's one thing, Kadari Richmond's been horrible from the line this year. So, it could be that if you force St. John's to shoot a bunch of foul shots and they have an off night, and you hit your foul shots, which you can't trust Seton Hall to do, but it's got to be a 1 in 100 shot. It's got to be. I just, again, this is sort of just it's a bad matchup for Seton Hall to begin with, and then you add all of the intangibles into it, and I think it's a hill too far for. I think it's a hill too high for Seton Hall to climb Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, according to ESPN Analytics, not that they mean anything, let's be honest. St. John's 96.1% favored to win that game. So, you're not.
So that's a 1 in
that far
25
off.
shot. That's better than I'm giving.
Yeah, I mean, like if you play 100 games, St. John's. Well, if you play 25 games, St. John's wins 24 of them. So yeah, no, you're that is correct. Now I think of it, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a substitute teacher and I suck at math. I can't do quick math. I love it. But by the way, you mentioned the awful officiating. Don't rule that out of the question. We've seen this conference, and it's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, we've seen it. Will it happen though? Probably not. And I don't think even if the officiating is poor, it's not going to matter because I think the ultimate outcome of the game is I think this is St. John's game to lose. Overall expectations for the game, I think at least I'll keep my synopsis short. I think Shaw's not going to allow his team to play worse than he did against them at the Rock. I think they'll still lose by a lot, but in terms of the overall performance of the team, they won't get run off the court and allow St. John's to have a dunk contest like they did in the second half. So I mean, Pat, I'll start with you and then have our guests save the best for last here.
Well, we're gonna have a closing thought, or do we want to?
I gave my overall prediction for the game and our overall outlook. I mean, I said Shaw's not gonna allow his team to get embarrassed the way that they did last time, but St. John's still gonna win convincingly.
I will 100. I put 100 to 1 out. Sure, I'm sticking to that. Just as a very quick aside, Seton Hall beat the St. John's women yesterday, for whatever it's worth. Seton Hall going into the last week of the season, 19-8, I believe. Senior night is Thursday. I bought my tickets today for senior night, so I will be there Thursday night when they play DePaul. Hopefully that's when good old Tony Bozzella wins his 20th game of the season, which is a good accomplishment. Even though he's got some talent on his team, it's still a good accomplishment when you win 20 games and you're probably going to go 13-5 in the Big East. I know that the women's website had some interesting comments about bracketology, which I didn't get a chance to break down very carefully. But shout out to them. I don't know how many people will be. If you're doing nothing else Thursday night, find your way to Walsh. It's easier to get tickets for a Thursday night game than for a weekend game, and say goodbye to Faith Mazonis in the proper way by encouraging them in their last home game this season.
Amen to that. Jaden, what do you got to close out the show?
Yeah, Saturday probably won't be much to speak about unless Seton Hall gets down early and makes it interesting, but I don't know if they could do that against the St. John's defense. I do want to shout out Tony Bozzella, and I did get approved from Mohegan Sun. I'm actually going to try to do the women's tournament this year, especially with the men playing at Gamble that Saturday at 2:30, and then if Seton Hall holds on to the 3 seed, 9:30 quarterfinal. Nice little men's, women's, Pirates, Connecticut doubleheader.
Sounds like a really good time. I mean, but don't go too hard on the slots before, though.
I haven't gambled since COVID. I lost $120 in Atlantic City after the world burned down, and I've been spooked ever since. I just go for the food. I'll house a pie of Frank Pepe's beforehand.
Yeah, that's the way to go. I mean, man, I miss going to Mohegan Sun for the women's tournament. I'm definitely I'll find a way to get back there one of these days.
You
Not
got to
this
get
year,
back up there,
but
Tim.
in the very near future, I definitely I love that going. The men's Big East tournament's great, but the kind of access and the great facility that they have at Mohegan Sun, all the amenities there.
I have not done the
I
women's
miss it.
tournament since 2012. That was the
Wow.
last time I did it. It was St. John's and Louisville in the quarters after I did the MAC tournament in Springfield earlier in the day, and then just took the train down to Hartford at the Civic Center. Turned out to be Kim's last win at St. John's before she took the Michigan job.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, it seems like that again. That's pre the massive realignment, and I think that's a pretty good way to close this episode. Obviously it's a big rivalry week for the
Sweet
Pirates, and
16 run.
yeah,
Oh, for St. John's?
Mm-hmm.
yeah, oh yeah. I remember. Wow, I actually remember that. So good on me, I guess. But yeah, Jaden, it was a pleasure to have you on back on our show. And of course, obviously St. John's is more so your domain, but you cover all of Northeast college hoops so greatly. I know you have a pulse on Seton Hall as well. Thank you again for your coverage, and you're going on what I mean, you're approaching the 20-year mark for Daly Dose of Hoops. I mean, so keep on doing what you're doing. We love your content, and thanks again. Couldn't thank you enough for being our guest once again.
Yeah, getting close. That means I'm getting old, but people like you keep me young. Tim, Pat, thank you so much for having me on.
That's going to do it for this edition of Hoist the Colors. For Pat Madden and our special guest, Jaden Daly from Daly Dose of Hoops, I'm Tim Best. Until next week, which will be March, John Rossi's favorite time of the year, onwards to Antonia.